You know, the tone of being too judgmental and having your hopes up high when it comes to material like this isn't a false to me, but at the same time, this episode, Europe World Trip A Night to Remember, really makes me to believe that this episode would have been something else entirely instead of another spy episode. And to tell you the truth, if any of you are going to say that Lincoln didn't learn his lesson about his family coming first than being a spy, well, the spies in Crisis is following him even across the globe, which I would have understand that that's what spies do. They go to different places around the globe, but at the same time, it's taking over the entire episode that it just takes away the development of Lincoln and his family to where his entire family is on board with it because they were on board with the spy situations in No Time to Spy movie, and considering that this is mainly a way to invoke the idea of Lincoln being a spy, this doesn't even feel like Lincoln is picking his family over his spies by his own decisions. It's mainly what's going on around him that makes him think otherwise, to the point that it's difficult to root against him if he ever took the role of being a spy. Granted, it's implied that he needs to be 18, but at the same time, if he is still given the chance despite being underage, do you really think that his family putting the family message in front of Lincoln will have meant something? They didn't do that in No Time to Spy, and they didn't do it here, and even if they tried, honestly, what's taken away from this episode when it comes to Lincoln and Luna's chemistry, it really shows to me that interactions aren't the answer to everything, to the point that when I wanted to see that from Across the Girls when it comes to Princess and Human Twilight, a lot has changed to the point that became an afterthought, to where this is mainly about the chemistry between Lincoln and Luna, since this would have been a chance to do it, but it's been dropped. And I'm gonna get to that much later. The premise of the episode when it comes to the beginning is that the Louds family went to Europe because Mick gave them invitations for the ceremony inside of the castle of Europe. Usually, the ideal of it all is fine for what it is. I had no problem with the characters going to Europe when it comes to the first episode of a ceremony that is mainly for Mick Swagger, who is willing to invite Luna and her family to come along. But instead, it's a spy episode where X, who was a character from the No Time to Spy movie, but I didn't mention her, who is an agent on trying to make sure that Mick Swagger is safe. But as it turns out, due to Lincoln and his family interfering, well, not really interfering, but helping out, it led to Mick Swagger getting captured, and this leads to the Lau family trying to rescue him because Mick Swagger's #1 fan isn't really Luna in some of the cases. It's mainly the person who lives in this location that he is so obsessed with, and all he ever wanted was a private concert. But that also has issues that I'm gonna be getting to later. This is a difficult episode to discuss because with some people that I've heard that they enjoy some scenes in this, including the spy elements. Do you really think that the spy elements is really needed in this episode while having one returning character who only had one appearance that, no offense, wasn't really that memorable to begin with? The way I see it, if the title of this episode, A Night to Remember, is a really good title. to the point that it really feels like it could have been catered to the chemistry of Lincoln and Luna, and what the direction of the episode would have taken would have been a lot more understanding, to the point that what I've seen throughout this episode from beginning to end, this is just basically a spy episode in disguise that didn't need it to be a spy episode. The ideals of the Loud family going to Europe in this new miniseries of road trip episodes is fine. Like, if this is a way for Nickelodeon to do these types of gimmicks in order to keep the Loud House going in some other way, I won't be judgmental towards that. But what I am judgmental towards is the fact that they really took things a little too literal with the spy elements than basically the spy stuff that they did in other episodes, including the movie. And this is well known when it comes to Mick Swaggle getting captured, and this just leads to everyone working together and instantly save Mick Swaggle, to the point that it just overshadows what this episode would have benefit from. To well, looking at this episode alternatively would have made this one of the best episodes in the entire series, because like I said, I'm not into spy elements and it didn't win me over in no time to spy. So they're literally milking the spy genre in this that didn't need it to be included. This is one of the examples of where they pick something that would easily fix the entire episode, but leaving out the element that would have benefited this episode to be like the classic seasons from the Loud House really makes this entire spy thing really unavoidable. To well, I don't even think that this is really a Europe episode, despite the fact that the characters are in Europe and this is the first episode of the Europe road trip. The second half of the episode caters to the family searching down Mick Swaggle, which I would have been on board with, but it really sums up the mentality of what Nickelodeon is putting into this show. Well, they're not even bothering on making one of the best chemistries of the Loud siblings, mainly Lincoln and Luna, together. And yes, they don't listen to the fans, they avoid the fans when it comes to listening to them completely, but there was nothing harmless into making a Lincoln and Luna episode, considering that nearly all of the characters in the Loud family had some sort of chemistry with Lincoln, with more continuing on, while the only episode that Lincoln and Luna ever had chemistry with was for Bros About to Rock, that was released 8 years ago. And looking back, this episode is still the only Lincoln and Luna episode. While afterwards, Lincoln ended up getting episodes with the rest of his family, but not with Luna. If you really feel like if you're still a fan of this show back in 2016, and one of your favorite things is the chemistry of Lincoln and Luna together, honestly, how can you still enjoy this episode, since that there is no chemistry between the two when it comes to development? Like, interactions isn't enough. There should have been more when it comes to these two, because all it ever reminded me of is the first episode from the last road trip arc, Bizarratorium. Well, it could have been a Lincoln and Rita episode, but with Lincoln carrying the entire episode, with Rita being an afterthought. Honestly, Luna isn't really an afterthought in this episode, since that she is Mick Swaggle's biggest fan, but the fact that Lincoln is carrying the episode, and the fact that it's not in the way, well, she is helping out Luna. What else do I need to think on the fact that I'm supposed to be blaming Lincoln for causing McSwagger to gain captured in the same ways of him blaming bad luck to his family in Bizarratorium, because it really makes you to believe that he is distant from his family, and if this show is trying to showcase that he isn't distant from his family by ignoring all the bad episodes, which is impossible for most fans, they should have taken value into making this a Lincoln and Luna episode in the same ways of making the first episode from the road trip arc, Bizarratorium, a Lincoln and Rita episode, rather than making Lincoln do most of the work. Yes, other characters are helping, but the thing is, it doesn't really make up with the issues that I have with the episode being a spy episode, judging the fact that you can still have the Lau family being helpful, but at the same time, with the direction of what the episode is taken, it really makes me believe that if this is acceptable, then the episode would have been fine. But for me personally, I really expected this to at least having one chemistry rather than multiple when it comes to Lincoln and Lynn together, but I'm not into that. And ignoring those terrible episodes, it doesn't really carry the entire episode for me. Even if I try to look at this episode as it's supposed to be a spy episode at the end of the day, honestly, whenever I think about this episode now, all I can think of is, this is a spy episode, nothing else. Sit down, watch it, you're gonna enjoy it. Granted, the episode isn't forcing anyone to sit down and watch it, but do you really think that the spy stuff really benefits literally everything else when it's overshadowing the major factor that I've been looking forward to? Because Nickelodeon had a chance to at least make an episode involving Lincoln and Luna when it comes to their chemistry together, but at this point, they're not even bothering to improve any of the relationships involving Lincoln and his sisters. Yes, I've been going on and on in the past that there are so many issues involving the Loud sisters, but when I'm mostly looking at the positives in this show, though little, and Lincoln and Luna is one of them. This is gonna be hard to adjust, but when you describe on the fact that the creative direction of this show is nowhere ever since Chris Savino left, well, not really left, but got fired, and the fact that this show just hasn't been the same since, there were still ways to instantly have better directions when it comes to this show, because every time I think of this show without Chris Savino, even if it's for the best when it comes to people making this show, it doesn't change the fact that the show itself that they're making literally has no direction that they could have instantly benefit on having their own creative direction of character chemistries among other ideals that wouldn't tick people off. The chemistry of Lincoln and his sisters in the episodes that I'm gonna show you, while some are bad, at the very least they did progress on his chemistry with those characters, because in A Grave Mistake, despite the episode being one of the worst episodes, it doesn't change the fact that it did include the chemistry of Lincoln and Lucy, and it preceded that. In episodes involving Lincoln and Lana when it comes to Frogwire and Wheel and Deal, or Wheel Deal, they at least knew each other personally when it comes to them at least working together. And when it comes to the Wheel and Deal episode, it really gave you the understanding that Lincoln understood Lana to an extent that despite cheating, it's literally the only way to help out Lana. And when it comes to Luann, when it comes to the pranking episodes, well, that's a different story to the point that, though it's mainly Luann's way of enjoying his whole way of April Fool's, but the third episode is a different story entirely. But when it came to some occasions, well, she hangs out with Lincoln, especially from the season 1 episode, you really get the impression that they at least know each other to an extent, and Lincoln actually learns something when it comes to Luann's way of thinking. And when it comes to Lenny, he helped her when it comes to getting her driver's license from the first season. Granted, it was a bad idea by having him show her the video game, which is not something that would translate into real life. But when you look at how they executed that episode to an extent, it really feels like Lincoln is getting closer to Lenny in some other extent when it comes to helping her out by getting her driver's license. And even though in the Grub Snub episode from season 5, despite being a bad episode, it at least showcases Lincoln and Lenny hanging out, even though it could have been executed much more better. When it comes to Lincoln and Lori, when it comes to the situation that Lincoln got in when it comes to insulting Ryan, and Lori desperately wants to be in a relationship with Bobby, all the while that he uses Lori in the waiting game episodes when it comes to the offers and basically causing her to work at a night shift. That is something that I would have been on board with if they actually took these types of chemistries seriously. Because while Lincoln and Lori is on normal terms, it doesn't change the fact that there was nowhere to go when it comes to the chemistry, which would lead to Lincoln and Lynn, which is honestly difficult to take their chemistry seriously, because some people may enjoy their chemistry. It doesn't change the fact that they would revert back to how Lynn treats Lincoln, which is really old, to the point that it's difficult to find any likability when it comes to Lynn's positive traits. But they still had some kind of chemistry, and they have more episodes together when it comes to occasions in season 5, 6, including the Taunting Hour, and season 7. When we look into Lily, when it comes to the Changing the Baby episode, Lily's chemistry there. Granted, Lily's a baby, so it's understandable that she won't remember what she experienced at a young age, but at some occasions, they at least had some kind of chemistry between Lincoln and Lily. And whenever I just instantly think about the other chemistries when it comes to Lincoln and Lola, honestly, their chemistry isn't really on healthier terms, to be perfectly honest. But the best episode that they had was Weeds Aloud, which is really a shame because at the very least, they're getting to know each other, even though it doesn't change the fact that these characters aren't going to remember anything. Or it's the fact that all these episodes are in a random order because, obviously, 3 Halloweens and whatnot, the other stuff going on and whatnot. Honestly, the timeline in this is just too difficult to take legitimate value. Getting back on topic when it comes to Rita and Lynn's soul, the fact that they got more episodes with Lincoln when it came to the season 8 episodes while Lincoln and Lynn are together. When it comes to Lance, his son, I'm sorry I forgot his name, the current owner of Camp Macedon from season 5, again, I don't remember his name. That really says a lot that there's a lot of chemistry when it comes to these characters. And the sad thing is that Luna is the last Loud sister that had the least chemistry with Lincoln. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that. Because whenever you think about all the other chemistries that Lincoln had, including his parents, it doesn't even compare to how little he had with Luna. This is something that I've thought of, and I'm pretty sure other people have thinking of the ideal when you take into the consideration that even if Luna Center episodes are good, it doesn't change the fact that her chemistry with Lincoln is way, way too little. To the point that these two characters supposed to know each other, but when I just look at the spy elements being factored in, it really feels like that they don't even know each other, even though that they're supposed to. Which really sums up what I feel when it came to this episode, because this will have been the first time that Lincoln and Luna had an episode after 8 years. That's almost a decade. When this show is trying to showcase the family itself, it didn't really do a good job ever since Nickelodeon fired Chris Savino. And regardless if Chris Savino going away, being blacklisted, is really important because of what he caused, it doesn't change the fact that he did one thing better, and it's the fact that he actually manages to make the chemistry of Lincoln and his sisters work out in the earlier seasons. Because despite with a few chemistry moments here and there after he left, it just makes me believe that they didn't put any meaning when it comes to those chemistry moments, when it comes to some pairings of Lincoln and Lynn, Lincoln and Lori, among those couple. And then when they have the opportunity that is right in front of them, that they're not listening to the fans, they just instantly don't take the family seriously, which is something that I've been noticing when I left out the fantasy elements, the spy elements, despite being a factor in this episode. And honestly, I did state it in my Close Encounters of the Nerds Kind review that this isn't white noise, but if it's going to continue with this type of development, then this show would end up becoming white noise with nothing to offer. Okay, let's get into the antagonist of this episode, Or. The reason why he kidnapped Mick Swaggle is because he really wanted a private concert of Mick Swaggle forever. You know, whenever I think about this plot, it's supposed to be psychotic, similar to Noah kidnapping the iCarly gang twice. But the fact that he doesn't get any screen time at all, and was supposed to take his character at full value because he went into every single Mick Swaggle concert, then they should have explored his character and introduced him in the majority of this episode, rather than just hammering in the spy elements in X's character. If he was a main character throughout this entire episode, especially as a villain, then I wouldn't see him as a plot device. Just because he went to every single Mick Swaggle concert doesn't automatically mean that I see him as a serious villain despite being psychotic, because the fact that we're supposed to take his character at full value towards the end of this episode, well, they could have easily make this character more fleshed out. Then I would say for a fact that his character wouldn't be a tool whatsoever. Granted, the antagonists that this show makes aren't really the best, but at the same time, this character would have at least stand out. I'm sorry guys, but when this episode had an opportunity, they just don't even bother to structure it correctly. And if it's either me just having my hopes up too high. When I have my hopes up too high, it's always rarely that I do it. I don't usually have hopes up too high all the time. And when this type of stuff happens, there's so much potential and promises. But even though that the episode isn't terrible, it doesn't change the fact that it's a spy episode that really overshadowed literally everything. Like, if Lincoln was into spy elements all the while ignoring what's going on, then I'm pretty sure that I would have at least understand where people are coming from when it comes to not siding with his character completely. Even though I prevent the idea of Lincoln being into spy elements all the while Luna really wants to hang out with Lincoln, which is similar to the Casagrande movie when it comes to Maria and Ryan's relationship. But it's still something that includes some sort of chemistry, even if I would prefer a better idea than that. This just makes me to believe that we're never going to have an episode centering around Lincoln and Luna together. I'm being really serious because I don't think that this show is going to be capable of doing a Lincoln and Luna episode if they don't take the chemistries of Lincoln and his sisters seriously. Because every time I think about the older episodes, this is one of the only things that I can side with X fans on not watching the show anymore when it came to a lack of chemistry when it comes to Lincoln and Luna. Or basically Lincoln and his sisters in general. Like, it's one thing to do different ideals, but when you have that taking over the chemistries of Lincoln and his sisters, then it's difficult for me to find any enjoyment out of these episodes, all the while seeing Lincoln's sisters, something that I really want to decide with as well, if they actually improved. And even if they do improved, they only improved on their own, not with Lincoln or themselves in general. Basically, them hanging out with the other sisters, like Luna hanging out with Lori and other stuff when it comes to the other sisters. The thing is that whenever I look at the Oreo seasons, despite being called the Golden Age, it really sums up a lot that the Leo seasons really lack what the Oreo seasons have, which is really difficult for me to look at any positives when it's overshadowing the element that would have made the episode more better. For the longest time, the spy elements in the show didn't bother me. But when it came to this episode, it did. Something that No Time to Spy didn't. Even if I was too critical in that movie, the spy elements weren't the issue. It wasn't in the way, since that it was the entire focus of that movie. But the fact that we had to do more spy elements in this movie, in this episode, honestly, the spy elements is what really jumps the shark in this show. This show jumps the shark when it comes to the spy elements, which is something that people may not agree with me, but really, I can't be able to enjoy spy elements unless if it's done in a way where I can understand why they did it in the first place. But in this episode, no. And whenever I think about Lincoln's obsession with spy elements, honestly, I'm still not rooting against him, because with the spy stuff still following him, honestly, if he was following the spy elements, then I can understand him being selfish, because throughout the majority of this episode, with a mistake that he did when it comes to Mick Swagger getting captured, he isn't selfish whatsoever. And to give a little props to this episode, Luna did say that Lincoln meant well, and she said it to his face, but it wasn't enough to instantly make this episode something that should have been. When it comes to the other Europe road trip episodes, honestly, since I didn't watch the road trip arc episodes from last year, aside from the Lin So one, I have no interest. Especially the Lin Jr. episode where she actually falls in love, which I could reconsider on making a review of this episode, but at the same time, I was originally planning on reviewing the season 4 episode of Lin Jr. Singled Out, because if you ask me, that episode really aged a lot more better, and once this episode comes out, all I'm gonna be thinking of is they just probably wanted another romance episode that centers around one of the characters that found romance for the first time, minus Study Muffin, in order to give Lin Jr. something. But I have other ideas that I could have done when it comes to reviewing other romance episodes from this show, and it could be them other than Singled Out. I'm just saying, I really feel like I would have given these episodes a chance if they actually did something that really made me appreciate A Night to Remember. But since that they didn't, all I can think of is, what's the point of watching these episodes when the main focus is the characters going to Europe? Because if that's literally the main objective of this entire arc, then it's really saying something that I'm not going to be into the road trip material if they're going to keep continuing it. If I continue to find an episode that I'm highly interested in, and it ends up the same way as this episode did, then honestly, Nickelodeon isn't even bothering to increase the interest by having the chemistry being the main highlight, when they're literally doing different ideas that really overshadows it. Because with this episode taking place while Lincoln is with his friends, and I did state it that his friends understand him more than his sisters, they would have gotten the chance to have at least Luna understand Lincoln and vice versa. Because at this point, all I can think of from this episode is mainly the fact that there is no chemistry whatsoever when it comes to Lincoln and Luna, because they're not even attempting to make any chemistry, despite the chemistry that Lincoln had with the other characters in his family. And it's really sad that the only chemistry that they have was from the Willy Loud House episode that I talked about in the beginning of this year. And if that's literally the only thing that spin-off can offer, then that is really saying a lot. I was originally going to review this episode as part of the new year, which is next week, and today would have been my 2025 plans video of what I'm going to be planning for next year. But the reason why I rescheduled is mainly the fact that I wanted 2025 to be a good start when it comes to my videos, mainly in January, and this will have been a perfect benefit of it. But after watching the episode, there's literally no point into waiting, and the reason why I decided to review this episode after Christmas rather than earlier is because I didn't want it to spoil the fans' fun when it comes to them enjoying this episode. Because again, some people still enjoy this episode, and I won't call you out on enjoying the spy elements, but this really reached my breaking point when it comes to the spy elements in this show. Whether if you agree with me or not. I didn't like the song Mix Swaggle Sun with Luna by her side because it didn't feel dissolved. It would have been dissolved if the episode was really focused on Luna to the point that it would have made this worthwhile. Especially since that this song is short, and this leads to the scene where Linso accidentally bumps the ruler of the castle outside. I didn't find this funny, considering that, in my point of view, this is mainly a metaphor of just doing the Europe trip and just make jokes and not focusing on the story that could have been improved. Broken records or not, what I'm saying is literally the truth that really sums up a lot that I'm not going to bother to watching any of the episodes from this road trip arc. I'm giving this episode... You're not going to like me for saying this, but this episode gets a 4.5 out of 10. Yeah. While it's not Cartoon Quest's material since it's not reaching the 4 out of 10 rating, but it's still close. Even if you may think that I'm not supposed to view this episode as what it should have been, but at this point, it's also showing me that the spy elements are really getting in the way. And if you ask me, the No Time to Spy movie should have been, well, they showcase the spy elements there and just save that for not this episode. Because if there's one thing that this episode has shown me, is the fact that the spy elements are overshadowing the chemistry of the family, and despite them being on board with the spy elements, honestly, why do I really think that me being into spies, if that was a possibility, will make me see that that is going to save the entire episode than seeing the chemistry of the characters? Because there was more to reasons onto why that it's hard for me to look at these characters now than how they were in the past, and whenever they go through these situations, despite having nothing to do with UFOs or basically magic elements, then I'm really starting to convince that this show is really lacking in chemistry when they have the opportunity to showcase that. They're not even bothering. And when they ignore the bad episodes and they're not even bothering, then there's no reason for me to feel any sympathy towards this family. I'm mostly understanding that family does have some values, but when it's not showing values in this, when it comes to the family message from the Christmas episode from last year, along with the family message in No Time to Spy, honestly, it doesn't change the fact that they're not even bothering to showcase that dynamic in episodes like this. Say all you want of how I'm far beyond critical when it comes to this show, to the point that you might say that I should just give up watching this show, but I wasn't being harsh towards people, which is really saying something on the fact that when I critique this show, I try to keep an open mind, but when they make choices like this and I've come up with new ideas, those ideas really factor onto why that this episode isn't one of my favorite episodes of this entire show, because it could have been. So, with that being said, I'm not going to drag out this longer than it should have been, because there's one more video to cap off 2024, and after that, it's gonna take a while for me to get back to this show. I do have ideas on reviewing this show for the new year, but it's not much. I don't have any ability to do more Loud House vs. Casagrande, especially since that doing a fanfic of Lincoln and Luna wouldn't be able to work out the depression that I've dealt with from this episode. So this year ended off with a wimbo involving the Loud House, but then again, it had its year last year, so honestly, it's depressing of how things turn out, but not everything needs to be good for every show. when it comes to me reviewing them, especially making them having an okay yield, because that was my intent on giving the Loud Tiles an okay yield for my schedule, but with stuff like this, honestly, it turned out the worst.